My name is Masha Posen, and I'm an OT, an occupational therapist. But I did education before I did, and I do work in education. You have bios on all of us, so everybody will introduce themselves a little bit. I do teach. I teach in high school, I teach undergrad developmental psychology, and I teach graduate school at U of T in occupational therapy. So I'm invested into education, but I also bring with the perspective of occupational therapy with me. And we wanted to take advantage of our guests that we have here and their wealth of knowledge to share with you some ideas, and we'd like to get your input and your questions and your experience to share with us as well. So I wanted to start first with Rabbi Diamond, if I could. And if I could ask you, though, to introduce yourself, and then I'm going to ask you a question, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. My name is Elliot Diamond, and given that the context of our conversation this morning is education, it's because I serve as the head of the Jewish Studies Department at a school called Netivot HaTorah Day School that I'm invited. Our school is just actually down the road. An Orthodox religious Zionist day school from nursery through to 8th grade. And in fact, it's a pleasure being here specifically at DANI because this year we innovated a program, and this is in cooperation with the parents of our 7th grade boys, and that's the year in which most of the boys celebrate and observe their bar mitzvah. So we began a project with DANI for the grade 7 boys, in which we've been here, and some of our boys, along with some of the clients here at DANI, spend a morning doing some baking, and they make some very delicious cinnamon rolls here. I can testify to that. We had an opportunity to learn a little bit about Torah with them, and to sing with them, and to develop some relationships with them. We did that twice, and then the group came to our school, where we did a little bit of sports activities with them in our gym. We continue to do a little bit of Torah learning. And it was actually wonderful to watch this relationship grow. Our children, our students, grade 7 boys, who sometimes, it's not an easy group to deal with. The kids are beginning to be adolescents. But they really connected to the clients here at DANI, and that was really wonderful. That was really, I think, the goal of it, to expose them to the broader Jewish community and to have those people who are connected to DANI, both the staff and the clients, come into our school. So that's been an extraordinary experience. That's the DANI experience. But Masha also connects with us in a different way, because as you've heard her speak about, she works with Zarenu. And Netivot, for the first year, has made a space available in our school for a program for Zarenu. And they have their program, but we strive to the extent possible to provide opportunities for integration for the kids in the Zarenu program and in our school. So there are specific kids who have integrated specific parts of our program, and there are assemblies and larger programs that the kids in Zarenu have joined in. And I think, again, it brings a tremendous opportunity for both elements to grow and to learn. Certainly the kids at our school, and I'd like to think also the kids that you work with at Zarenu.
So Rabbi Diamond said that he's let Zarenu into his school, and I want to tell you that he's brought Zarenu into their hearts, not into their school. And I want to say that it's often a big challenge for us to find schools that are receptive to providing a class in their school. And we've come across resistance in many different forms, and yet you have been so welcoming to us that although we know that it comes from a marvelous place in your heart and from a Torah principle of chesed, we really believe that there's got to be more to it. There's got to be more about why you're including us and what you see as the challenges in having included us, and what you see as the benefits and the gains of having included us.
So, Rabbi Taub has touched on something that I was thinking about on the way here, Masha, and I'll just share it with you. In your comment just now, you phrased sort of the Netivot's initiative in the context of chesed. I don't think that's correct. I think it's really tzedek. Because I think chesed, as he indicated, is more of an act of compassion. I don't think it's about compassion. I think in a larger picture, it's about doing the right thing. And I think when you take a look, and especially I was moved by Rabbi Talbot's introduction, it's about valuing the individual, and not because it's a compassionate thing to do, but because it's a right thing to do. So I think there's a distinction there. But having made that distinction, let me say a couple of things, because I don't want to, have a halo around my head, because I think that would be a little bit disingenuous. So yes, we did do this, and I think we did it because we thought it was the right thing to do. But it's also important to add another thing: we could do it. So what do I mean by that? So when Zareno approached us and asked us, was it possible for them to locate a program in our school? The answer was yes, because we had the room. What if we didn't have the room? So then what? Would we add on, would we construct a new room? Would we take on a $400,000 deficit to make sure that the 15 kids? I don't know if we could have done that. So it was easier for us to do it because actually we had it, which I think touches upon a bigger picture question, and that is, so how do you end up setting up priorities? Who sets the policies, and who's allocating the money, and how do we end up making those decisions? For us, in this context, we felt we had the room, it was not something we were using. Zareno approached us, it seemed like the right thing to do, to allow a program that needed a place to come to our school. But in some ways, as you indicated, we knew that there's going to be a benefit to us too. Because I think the more you educate children into the breadth of the Jewish community, I think more you're teaching kids about leadership in the future. And I'd like to think that one of the benefits for this may not just be now for these children, but the more kids like this, the more these programs are integrated, then at some point, some of these kids are going to be community leaders. And they're going to be sitting around some table somewhere. And they're going to have to make a decision. And if in their own personal history, they can go back and touch how this really mattered to them, then they'll be the policymakers who are going to make a decision. So I haven't heard Rabbi Talbot's perspective in his keynote address, but certainly I think the investment is almost in terms of creating the future leadership who will then understand, in my opinion, it's not just chesed, it's about tzedek.
Thank you. Could I ask you to touch, though, on some of the challenges have been?
So some of them are really more technical. It sounds in some ways a little bit trivial. So there's scheduling, how do you make sure that the schedule of one school jives with the schedule of another? And so those are little technical things. You have to sit down and you have to figure it out, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. You guys have been on the other end of it. You know the schedule of space, right? We have kids in the Zareno program who are in our school kitchen doing music because I don't have a space. So you're dealing with, bearing the brunt of that. But from our point of view, I may have to say to you, sorry, you can't have this room because we need it for a program. So those are technical difficulties that can be limiting and can be frustrating for you as well as for us. And that sometimes is the reality. There's a death by 1,000 qualifications. So you sometimes have to sort of consider what the little details are. And big pictures do have little details. And so while you may be motivated by great things in your heart, sometimes you get stuck not by having good intentions, but by figuring out how to make it work. And sometimes the making it work part is the frustrating part.
But it sounds to me like you've been able to work through the frustrating day-to-day frustrations in order to achieve the global goals.
You do. And sometimes you have to give up something. Okay, you can't take these kids into this room. Everybody, we're going to have to change. We're going to have to do something different. So that can be frustrating for a teacher who might have had a plan and it's not working out. And sometimes you have to do last-minute changes. But I think by and large, schools are a place of tremendous activity. And the more you spend in a school, you realize it's about the ability to be flexible. And when you have people who have, as part of their awareness, the need for flexibility, a lot's possible.
I agree. Somebody once told me that they see me as rigidly flexible.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
Can I?
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry. So, I mean, those are technical challenges. The technical
Can
challenges.
I interrupt you and ask you to just tell me who you are?
Sure. My name is Daniel Held. I'm the Executive Director of UJ Federation's Kashitsky Center for Jewish Education, which is the capacity building arm of Federation for day schools and supplementary schools, formal education in the city. And I'm new here. So I arrived back in Toronto in January. And I'm just getting my head into a lot of the ecosystem of education in Toronto. Though I grew up here and I went to school here and I taught here, I've been away for a while. And I'm getting back into a system that's very much changed, and we'll talk about that. Changed from where it was 5-6 years ago. So my question is really, we think of challenges that we face in two senses, one being technical challenges and the other being adaptive challenges. A technical challenge is a technical fix. We don't have enough space, so we jiggle things around, we find space. We don't have enough time, so we find more time. We need to move people in the right place at the right times, reschedule, things like that. And those are relatively easy. They aren't like the deep-seated, they don't speak the deep-seated sense of self that people have and the deep-seated emotions and deep-seated theories of who we are and where we are. What I'm hearing from other schools is what they consider to be more adaptive challenges. Parents will express concern about like who is the student body, trying to understand who they serve and who they can serve, what's the breadth of people we can serve within our school, what are our core competencies and things like that. So and this is partially the conversation about growing Zarena's program into other schools in our community. And I'm curious what adaptive challenges the school faced when they were thinking about starting this program.
So the adaptive challenges, I think, well, let me answer in two ways. So to bring in a independent program that's functioning with their own staff and their own mandate in their own room and house them in our school is one set of challenges, which may not be as deep as, let's say, we're not going to have Zarena, but we want to integrate into our own program and be responsible for delivery of education and the provision of care for children with challenges. That, I think, is a bigger question, and many of the day schools are searching for answers to that. How to be inclusive, not by having an independent program be housed in your school, but to have a program that, as a school, can deliver or respond to needs. That's a much bigger challenge. And I think you phrased it, Daniel, to what extent we can accommodate or provide for all of the students and where the limit is. So that's hard. That's very difficult. And you may have a big heart, but you also know that you have realistic limitations. And I think we're trying to do that. We have, I think, tried and continue to try to provide as much inclusion as we can. We have students in our school who have challenges, both physical and cognitive. We have parents who support us, support their children in providing education. But the reality is that there's some children whose needs are such that we will not be able to provide for them, either because the needs go beyond our own resources, or the child needs an environment that's different. It's just, they can't function in our school because either curriculum is too demanding, or even because the type of therapeutic environment is too specialized. So we try. If you were to say to us, as in your capacity here, you have a blank check, create the program you want, it might look different in 10 years. But it's not going to happen. Nobody has a blank check. That's not life. That's not reality. You never get a blank check. So I think that given that, there really is an adaptive challenge. To what extent can you adapt without either changing yourself so dramatically that you're not the same school, or trying to adapt to the needs of one segment and then by so doing, forgetting another.
So Rabbi Diamond, you're responding to the question from the perspective of the school.
Correct.
And what the school can do in an individual circumstance scenario. And I'd like to place the question back to you then, in terms of where do you see the future in terms of the global perspective, both in Canada, you just knew it, but you bring with the North American perspective. What are the sort of the visions and the goals in terms of how you might see facilitating that inclusion?
So let me tell you some of the things I'm trying to learn about. I think that may lead into this. I'm trying to learn about the needs within our current school system and our current community, which I think are discrete. So one of the questions that I have when I go to schools is, if we think about what a school like Nativot can provide, within the school structure, the framework of Nittivot, and what's provided within the physical structure of Nittivot through Zarenu, what's the gap in between there? And what are we missing and who are we missing? And those are some of the questions. Our data, centrally thinking about special needs within our day schools, is actually pretty weak at the moment, and high up on my agenda. One of the projects we're working on at the moment is trying to learn more about the needs within our school system. So when we look at IEPs, individual educational plans, we know that province-wide about 15 to 18% of students in the province have IEPs. In our day schools, there's a lot of fluctuation. So in about 9 of our schools, that number ranges from 15 to 20%, and in 3 of our schools, those range from 25 to 40% of students with IEPs. And part of that is because we aren't quite yet where we need to be in terms of how we use IEPs, how they're developed, and what they actually mean. And I think that we sway in 2 directions. On one hand, I think in some respects, we aren't equipped to have those conversations well with parents. So I think in some respects, we're inhibited from having conversations with parents about students' needs. My daughter's 2. She gets a daily report card from her gun. And one day she got a report card that said, maybe this shouldn't be taped, but she's 2 and she'll get over it.
You won't put on the resume.
Exactly. This shouldn't scar her for life. Reva needed help today learning how to share. In truth, Reva didn't need help learning how to share. Reva wasn't sharing, right? And we can all think of examples like this that we've seen in our kids' report cards. Daniel improved in his handwriting, which really meant that, it's true, you can look at my handwriting, Daniel's handwriting isn't very good. Which also means that there could be other issues working in there. Does that mean I have an issue with fine motor skills? Does that mean I have an issue with timing? There are so many complex issues that sit behind that sugar-coated statement of Daniel improved in his handwriting. And we need to work out how we dig into those. So when I say that the use of our IEPs is not necessarily on par with the provincial use or the provincial rates, one reason is because we don't know how to develop those properly. And the second reason I would say is because we sometimes use those as crutches or tools for advocacy. So that could mean advocacy for entrance to university, that could mean advocacy for extra time on tests, that could mean advocacy for special supports. And we need to become more systemic in the way that we screen, assess, and evaluate special needs within our system. So we become more precise what we mean. The term special needs is so broad that we end up putting all kinds of things into that bucket without properly differentiating. So one of the processes that we're starting now at the Koshitsky Center, which we're starting piloting with a couple of schools in the spring and we'll move to all of our schools in the fall, is to do an IEP review in all of our schools. To work with the schools to look at their IEPs, to compare an IEP to an OSR, an Ontario Student Record, to look at, is this IEP accurate to the student's needs, and then how are the needs representing the services provided by the schools. What we're trying to do now is take our little bit of funding that we offer for special needs in our schools, which I have to say is a small percentage of the total investment that our schools make in special education in Toronto, and help leverage that money towards speaking more specifically to the needs in the schools and the gradated needs in the schools, recognizing that not all IEPs require the same marginal funding. Some students have higher levels of needs and therefore require more funding for that, and some have lower levels of needs and therefore require less marginal funding for that student. So that's sort of the systemic thinking that we're doing, and I hope that by, let's say, the winter of next year, we'll have much stronger data in terms of who's currently in our school system and the needs that they have. The next step then will be who's not in our school system.
That's the big question to me, yes.
And look, I should be honest, when I say school system, I'm really talking about 14 schools, and then Zarenu as something separate. And the question becomes, how do we expand the program of Zarenu? How do we expand the potential that our schools can offer the wide spectrum of students? And then what else is missing in that mix? And that's going to be a question, once we properly understand who's in our system, we have to understand who's not in our system, and where they fit within our system, and how can we build a system or an ecosystem that is better equipped to meet that wide spectrum of needs, when currently we're only hitting a narrow spectrum.
So what I'm hearing you say, and you can tell me if I'm understanding it correctly or not, is that in coming in almost as an outsider viewing what exists, what you're seeing is a bunch of disparate different systems going, and what you're trying to do is establish some baseline foundation so that we're all going to be talking the same language. First looking at what you have in place, and only then looking at what's missing, before we can then look at how to include what's being missed.
Yeah, though I should say, I mean, we know that system change in schools is a 5 to 7 year process. So my initial landscape study that we're sort of embarking on right now is the first step towards building our shared language on a system basis, which won't necessarily become the shared language on a school level basis immediately. That's a long process. So if we start with an IEP review, we hope that the next academic year, which brings us to 2015-16, we can start looking at universal early literacy screening to start saying the baseline on the youngest levels, K through 2, and then move up from that point. But this is a long process of system change.
So I'm pleased that you're starting somewhere, because you've got to start somewhere to be able to then build. And I think that that there's been a lot that's been missing in the past. And if I can then move on to Elaine, and I'll ask you to say who you are in a minute. I'm going to ask you your question first, because I think that Elaine brings us a wealth of knowledge and experience, because you straddle two sides of the fence. You come in as an incredible educator and specialist in special ed, who we all look to in terms of your expertise. But you have the very personal piece of also having a very special relationship with a very special young woman with special needs. And so I'd like to hear, bringing all your pedagogical stuff with you, hear it from a personal perspective about the integration of someone with special needs into the Jewish day school system.
Thank you. A lot of you know my special person. Her name is Bracha Spivak. She's my oldest granddaughter, Karina. She's 21. And one day when we have some long time, I'll tell you just how I got into special ed 3 years before she was born. Hashem just made it work. But I was thinking about the answer that I wanted to give, and I just wanted to go back a little bit to my own experience as a young child in Brooklyn. There was a class. It was a phantom class. We could never see it. We would they would come in and they would eat and they would leave, and we'd kind of get the feeling that they had left, and they were in this room, and I remember trying to find where the room was. Mm-hmm. I knew it, look in, and you couldn't, and they were there, but they weren't there. And then fast forward a lot of years, and I used to take a woman up to the country in New York to visit her daughter. And there were huge buildings, huge institutional buildings, where they housed people with developmental delays and people with mental illnesses. And that was the first time I ever saw individuals with Down syndrome. And they had they didn't even have a playground. It was swings. There was this little schoolhouse for maybe thousands of people. And then I got into special ed, and I didn't get into developmental delays really until I came to Toronto. And at that time we were a group of people, many of whom are here. Susie Sokol was one of them, and we worked very hard on getting, what could we do to get special ed into the schools. Elliot, I was thinking that, I don't remember whether we did it or we talked about doing it, but Nitsi Vote was the only school that was willing, remember when we were in a long time ago, was the only school that was willing to even consider it. And yes, they all said we don't have the space. But the main thing that people said was, what will other people say? We have an image, and if we bring these children in, and at that time we were also talking about learning disabilities, if we bring these children in, we're going to get a name for ourselves that won't be positive. Baruch Hashem, I have to say that over the past 21 years, let me just go back a little bit. When Bracha was going into grade 1, so she had been integrated until that, and she'd been in Zerenu, because I very strongly believe that kids with special needs need to be with kids with special needs. They talk the same language, they deal the same way, they need to be integrated into the community because they need to have role models, they need to have a lot of other things, but they need both. So Bracha had both for a very long time. And I went to a dear friend of mine in Beis Yaakov in grade 1, and I said, Minna Saberman, you must take bracha. She says, no, I said, she's going to change your life. I'll take care of her education. You take care of her. And she was reading already at that time. And I remember, and we hired...
Bracha, not
bracha. No, right, bracha. And we hired an assistant in the classroom. Because we didn't... Private.
That's important.
No, we did. No, but we also had money from the government, and that covered most of it. And then we put in somebody. Yes, it's very expensive to have a child with special needs on many levels. So the assistant would take lots of groups out. And one time she was taking the higher level group, and Minna said, Bracha, you go with this group. And the assistant's like, what do you mean? Bracha for a year was the highest reader. And maybe even into grade 2 she was the highest reader. Eventually, she needed more and more assistance that we had to pay for. And we're not a wealthy family, but whatever money we had, we did. That was our priority. Eventually she left Serena. She went full-time. She's now graduated. She's now working. She is the best assistant in the daycare. She went away. She's in Beis Yaakov in the daycare. She works with the babies. She went away for 10 days. They hired 2 people to take her place. Their kids will only eat by her, only go to sleep by her, and she works in another thing in the afternoon. She's very sociable. She goes to all the vorts. She doesn't know that she has challenges. She doesn't know what the name of the challenge is, but she knows. But the girls very often comment that they have changed. I was at a wedding and she was taking some food and home, and one of the girls was helping her out. And not helping her out, but like just being her friend and talking to her, and there was the picture of all the girls in the class, and she was there. Come on, bracha. So I think, Elliot, what you had said was very important. That integration does more for the community than it does for the children or for the adults. And I think it's very important that, and I always say this to the women that I work with, the teachers, they're not disabled children. They're children with challenges, or if you want to say disabilities. I put the child first. Somebody said, they're not wheelchair. You don't look at the wheelchair. You look at the child. And you don't look at bracha in the way that her face looks. But you look at who she is, and you have a charming conversation with her, and you delight in her, because that's really who she is. So we've come, even though we've talked about how far, I've been out of the big picture for a while, and I'm hearing you say things that we talked about 20 years ago. And, as David HaMelech says, things don't change. Things haven't changed. We've had studies.
He's trying to change them.
No, what I want to say, but what I really want to say is that if you go into any school today, there are kids just like Bracha who are integrated into the programs. There are children with significant learning disabilities. There are children with autism. There are children with physical challenges. There are children in segregated classes. There are children integrated on an individual basis. There are lots of challenges, but when we look back over the 20 years or 35 years that I've been in the city, I see tremendous growth. And I thank those people who are on the special education end, and I thank those people on the typical education end, and I thank the community at large. Children aren't being housed in institutions. They're not being given away. They're, I remember when Rebecca was born, the things that we heard was just incredible. And and it's very cute because she has 2 friends now. She has one that's a little bit older that lives across the street, and she has one up here that came into her life 2 years ago. And the 3 of them are hysterical. I mean, they walk, you have to just see them. They go to weddings together, they walk together, they talk together. 2 minutes after Shabbos, the phone rings, it's one of them. And I'm so grateful to Hashem for allowing me to be part of this growth, being part of all the things that you're doing, and just continue to grow, and to know that there's a lot ahead, and it's all good. It's all good, and we're just all in it together.
I also
That's my
heard,
message.
thank you. I heard two interesting comments from you that I want to just pull out again. And that was that you talked about a duality, and you talked about the importance of having the special directed environment, whether it be with the therapeutics or whether it be in a social component, and that with the peer modeling, that both components are needed for the maximization. And I also heard about the money piece, and how that's really a big piece also, and that it was incumbent on you to create a program and to fund that program in order to enable it. And I'm pleased to hear the initiatives that are taking place now for establishing first the baseline, to then be able to move beyond that to who's not currently being included in the program.
You know, the other side of that is that unlike Elaine and her family, there are families who have not yet made the decision that the money is worth it. And
Right.
expect the schools
Yes.
to pick it up.
Yes, yeah.
And it's very difficult.
Yes, of course it is.
So on the one hand, you know, the school says, we want to be inclusive, and we expect you to be a partner with us. And then the family doesn't live up to their expectations. And that creates a lot of tension, because who wants to be the school that says, take the child away, you know, because we can't handle it. But it's a struggle. And
But where are we as a community in saying that we believe that all children in the community are entitled to a Jewish education?
That's true.
And Jewish inclusion.
That's true. But it's also important to remember that ultimately the responsibility of a child's education is the parents.
Right.
And schools are institutions there to help the parent fulfill that responsibility.
Agreed.
And that sometimes parents don't necessarily create what appears to me to be the right priority list in terms of how they create their own allocation of resources. And that they say, you know, let the school pick up it, let you guys figure it out. Well, this is an incredibly important issue, and it's broader than just inclusion.
Yes.
But in this piece, because Elaine brought it up, I think it's important to point out that there will have to be, I think, some point in which the family says, we're going to have to really step in and play a much more significant role.
And that's not just with kids with learning issues, with developmental delays. It's for those children that have significant learning issues that need more than the remediation that we can give, and may even need more than what the BJE can fund. And that's a reality.
I think that part of it is the parent's perspective on things as well. I heard the story, and you can tell me if it's just apocryphal or not, but I heard the story that when Bracha was born, they took Bracha to show Lena. And so in looking at this baby they showed her, they recognized what her challenges were going to be, and that Lena said to her husband, "This is our Bracha."
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that frames their perspective.
Yeah. One of the things that I want to say, and I do this all the time, is when I see a young child with Down syndrome and like a new baby, I wish the mother mazel tov. And what a bracha, what a great thing. I know it's hard, but you'll get a lot of nachas. And I also will go and I'll say, I have a granddaughter that looks just like her, or just like him, and that sets up. But the idea that all children are a bracha, and I sometimes have more trouble with some of my typical grandchildren than I have with her, and all kids are a challenge. And she has her own unique challenges. But what she gives all of us is, can I just say about siblings? It was hard. She was the oldest, and then there were a lot of others. kids weren't always nice to the siblings. And now the siblings have such a deep understanding, like you said, compassion. And I like what you said about being leaders. Because my grandchildren and their friends and Bracha's friends are going to advocate. And sadly, I hope the Mashiach comes so that it doesn't happen. But that more children are being born with challenges. And that these children, these young adults will be able to deal with that and help their siblings and their friends and themselves deal with those challenges.
I have a couple thoughts. My name's Alana Hoffer. I work with the York Region Board. I teach deaf and hard of hearing kids at the board. And I wanted to say, you were mentioning that kids used to be kind of shipped off to their own classes, and same in deaf and hard of hearing. We have the provincial schools, 3 provincial schools in the city, Belleville, Milton, and it used to be that as soon as you were born with a hearing loss, you were shipped off. It's not that way anymore. So now, all of our kids with hearing loss are integrated into the mainstream, into the public board. The difference being, even in my experience in the 15 years, I've seen religious kids in the public board. Okay? Why are they there? Because my services as a hearing teacher are free to the parents and to the families. And if they come to any of the religious schools, they're not free. I know Nativot has kids with hearing loss in the board, within the school, which is fantastic. But I think one of the things we need to think about is, as we talk about finances and who's not being included, is to find a way to bring these religious deaf and hard of hearing kids back into the religious schools. And maybe it's a shared funding piece. We talk about whose responsibility is to pay. They know if they're on the public board, it's free and it's covered. Up to 6-7 hours per week of support. They come to the religious schools. At the moment, if they want it, they pay for it. So maybe we have to come up with a model whereby parents pay half, school pays half, or some combination of that, which I know our resources are stretched, but I don't want to see any more religious kids in the public school when I know they belong in the religious schools.
I think that's a great point. I think that, I'm sorry for looking at you, but I think that is something that we need to address. We used to be in that scenario for lots of children before 10 years ago, before we had CCAC putting in funding, when we fought for fair funding and lost. What we did get was the Ministry of Health put in equivalent services into the private schools for OT, PT, speech, nursing support, and personal support, which has been a really big help in many of the schools. And so before that, many of the children with other challenges also could not be in their family schools, in their community schools. They needed to be in the public school system because of funding.
Right.
So we've got that great advantage of CCAC taking a lot of the financial burden for many of the things, but it is true that hard of hearing and deaf is still one that is isolated and not viewed as being a challenge to be covered.
In part because it's an invisible challenge, right? And so it does often get pushed by the wayside. But maybe if we can just keep that in our minds as we're kind of moving forward and trying to figure out who to include and how to fund
Thank you
them.
for advocating. I think that's a big thing. I think it's not just people with developmental challenges, learning challenges, but the bright kids who have physical challenges who need to really be there and be dealt with.
I mean, I'll say so. Historically, Federation puts somewhere in the area of $750,000 into special needs education for students with special needs in our schools. And historically that's gone through JFNCS and JBS, which has been largely used for psych evaluations and for social work services. Once we go through this process of the IEP review, the funding will go directly to the schools based on the needs of the schools. The schools are then going to be, I'm putting the burden on your shoulders, but the schools are then going to have to think through the allocation of both those resources and their own resources, because at the end of the day, we're putting in, I'm going to say, well less than a fifth of the total school funding for students with special needs. And the question becomes, how does that money get allocated on a school basis, which I honestly think is healthier than on a system basis. But on a school basis, knowing the students within your school and knowing the needs of the students within your school, and quite frankly, knowing where else funds can come from other school budgets and from development and from parents and things like that. How is that funding allocated to the vast variety of needs of the students in your school? So what we're moving towards is school-level decision-making on that, rather than us playing this awkward role of being sort of the intermediary between the consumer and the provider, the schools and the service providers.
There is one major problem with that, and that, thank God, we don't have that many children in our system. And so there may be, let's say, 10 with Downs, but there's a whole spectrum of age, and that, I'm making the numbers up, but another 10 with autism. And so when you're asking a school to provide for that small group of kids in his school and a small group of kids in my school, then there's a lot of money that's going into it, and you may not be able to take in that other child.
And so that's the balance between there being lumpers and splitters. Whether you gather together all of those that need the same kind of services and give a focused amount of service there, or splitting them off where they're within their community school and with their family schools. And what I heard you say earlier was that you needed a bit of both. And perhaps that's really a model that we might consider. Yeah, Rochelle.
Well, could the Federation consider hiring, let's say, instead of each school hire a speech path for the 2 students that need it here and 2 students, can the Federation then hire all of these special ed, and then again, then you're pooling your resources in that way, and you're more like the public system where they have the
itinerant.
Right, so what I'd say is we're embarking on this process of learning what the needs are of the students in our schools. And once we have a sense of that, then we'll be able to turn to the schools and say, we know that you have the following needs, and the school, the 3 schools in Atkins have the following needs. Maybe it makes sense for someone to be within those 3 schools.
Right.
But I just don't think we have the information at the moment to really know who's in our schools, what those needs are, what schools, what the schools need. And then as a conversation which we can convene, and I think that's very much our role for the schools to have that conversation, because there are so many technical pieces to that. The scheduling,
Right.
spaces,
Why reinvent
and things like
what
that.
we
To some extent, not with all services, but Jewish Vocational Services does a lot of psychometric and psychoeducational testing. So that's a service that is provided by the larger community and is portioned out to the various schools, and we benefit from that service in that way. Up until actually this year, we, however, had somebody that we pay privately to do the educational assessments. We've changed the model and now going to that one. I love the idea of having some sort of partnership and collaboration between schools and sort of creating little hubs that make sense because of the geographical neighbors associated with possibly with time, depending what the needs are. But it's probably not going to be sufficient, and there probably will have to be some sort of formula by which it may be fee for service. In other words, parents who want a service for their child may have to provide for part of the cost, and either it will be coming from Federation or Federation in the school budget to see if we can do the rest. But that becomes ultimately a huge fundraising challenge, even for you and certainly for us. And it's not easy. Fundraising is a huge portion of private education challenge. When you have a $7 million budget and tuition only covers part of it, then you have a gap that you have to make up. And it's not easy. I don't have to explain that because that's just so it's evident.
I want to even throw another wrench into the works. Even if we got that all sorted, we got the baselines of what the needs were, and what the pieces are missing. Then, how do you prioritize what services you're going to give to what kids? When you have these special needs kids, is it knowing their timetables or knowing what the capitals are of all the provinces that's going to make it so that they can go on to be functional members of the community? Or do you need to take a look at functional life skills? Sorry, I'm an OT. Looking at the concrete kinds of things of, well, what does this kid need to know? Do they need to know how to cross the street, how to make a value purchase, how to have good personal distance, things like that?
Yeah.
How do we then prioritize?
Or the opposite. I met with an expert in special education on I'm going to say it was Thursday, it could have been Friday or Wednesday, but someday this week. And she said to me that her focus is on categorizing. So she says students who she thought with special needs were able to say, this is a dog, this is a cat, but weren't able to say, this is an animal, because an animal is an abstract concept. And she's been doing a lot of work in almost the opposite direction of helping them at the earliest ages move from the discrete and the concrete to the indiscreet, to the
abstract.
Thank you. There you go. And she was giving examples. Everything goes back to my daughter, right? She was giving examples of my daughter, 2 years old, taking these little shapes and being able to sort of group the shapes and think beyond the the concrete of this is a shape to the abstract of these are all the red shapes. And starting the it seems to me as I'm learning more and more about this, that there are multiple theories as to what that basic need is, and it'll be dependent to a large extent of the child.
Yes.
I just add to that. I know, like in the board, we do a functional assessment. So we do an assessment. So we, the teachers are involved, the parents are involved. We get a basic idea of where they're working in terms of relative to their peers, and then we basically have a sense of how much support each child needs based on an assessment like that. So it's an individual thing, and through doing it that way, you have a sense of this child needs an hour support a week, this child needs 6 hours support a week, and then you can gauge it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I'm listening to them with great interest because I work, as my colleague Lena, in a public school system of York Region, and I teach kids with autism. And now I'm saying fortunately, but for the longest time I was saying unfortunately in the secondary level, because I love this part when you teach kids knowledge, right? Like reading, writing, and all these things. And now I'm teaching life skills, because in elementary school and secondary school we only deal with this part of their life. And I know from the experience the public system went through that the major challenge after you cover all those bases that you're just talking about is how to change the psychology of a teacher of math, English, geography, and every other subject, to accept kids who are a little bit different. How do you differentiate on all these levels so those kids can go to their home schools when their challenges are not so drastic, right? Because a lot of times kids are squeezed into the special education community because teachers can't handle them, and it takes unbelievable amount of time and money to educate those teachers that you have to accept every student as an entity and try to teach to the needs of the student. And it's not because they don't want to, they are feared. Especially autism. It's a fear of this unknown and a challenge of doing more work than need to do to reach for every kid. And I'm just stunned because I was thinking that in a smaller school, which I'm thinking that most of the Jewish schools are smaller schools in numbers. No? I'm wrong?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, because it's very hard. Like somebody of my bosses in New York region said, what do you do with the system as a Titanic? It's as big as a Titanic. And I said, oops, it's not a good comparison. But it's the right comparison.
Right.
Because being so big, the system is stuck in their own wheels, right? And now we see that this is probably wrong to integrate all those kids and to deprive them of the services that they can get in the smaller schools. And we are
in more specialized programs.
right, and we are trying to find a solution. What is the balance between giving the kids with autism? I won't speak for everyone because I don't really know how others deal with that, but I know that kids with autism are suffering so much from the building itself with all the sensory issues that they can't function to the level they may be able to function in a smaller school, right? And how do you like I was really stunned about your example how kids from Nativot Hadra came to DANI, and it's kind of an integration that is natural, and it definitely develops understanding of people's differences. And I was interested how those kids would change to their fellow students who are not severely disabled but a little bit strange because they have Asperger's, right? Would they look differently at the difference after that?
That's a really good question.
Right? Or they will say, okay, those kids obviously are people with challenges, so those people are with challenges, but you're just misbehaving.
Right.
Will they become more accepting? Because I guess like we're struggling with that because in 2014, our class is this small class that is hidden in the corner of our beautiful new building. And when I get a student, grade 12, who is coming and saying, how come I'm 4 years in this school, I've never heard about this class? And we are everywhere, I thought. We are in the cafeteria, we're in school events, and they grow and say, I would do something for that because I want to learn psychology, I want to be a teacher of this and that, and I never knew this class existed in our school. I just dropped that and say, I'm doing the wrong job. What I'm doing there then, because we're integrated. We have IEPs, we are totally checked out. I think your teachers are just breathing there because the amount of accountability we go through is unbelievable. We know our job better than any of the people who are trying to check what we are doing, right? And still, like we have so much pressure from the government. So I don't even know like where to start with all that. And absolutely right. How many students have been through my class who are from very often not very religious families, but at least traditional families. And they're pressured to the public system because they have no access to their community, right? And luckily parents have means, they can integrate it somehow through the summer school or Sunday school, how they call it, whatever, but I know they're struggling. I know that they prefer the different, right? So I guess it's a long way for both of the systems, right? I don't know what is the goal of my speech. It's coming to be a long speech, but
and that if I've idealized the public school system, that maybe it's not as ideal as I thought, and therefore the gap is not as big as I thought it was. I think, though, there's a lot to learn from the public school system so that we don't reinvent the wheel, and to learn the things that you've seen that do work, and the things that you're already seeing as challenges, so that maybe we can sidestep some of those challenges.
Because if you educate the teachers, you may save so much money on all these special services.
So I think in both educating the teacher, the teachers and educating the kids, I think that one of the things that's really valuable, we have found to be really valuable, is that we've done these sensitization workshops. Right, where we go into different schools, into different settings, and we give the students an opportunity to experience some of the challenges, whether they are cognitive challenges in learning things, whether they're physical things, whether they're communication things. We give them the challenge. We could add a hearing piece. We do give them a little bit of that sense of what it feels like, and to see that they can do everything. It just takes a little bit more energy, a little bit more concentration, attention, what it feels like to be that other person. And we hope that they become a little bit more sensitive. And our feedback in our doing them, in the feedback reports, have been, in fact, not only do the students who participate in it have a greater sensitivity, but the families of those students increase their sensitivity. There's lots of conversation that goes on at home. And if we're empowering them to become the future leaders, as you talked about, then I think that that is a way that really makes a difference.
I wanted just to ask, it was mentioned before that not all children who have special needs in the schools can be serviced, or their needs can be actually addressed properly. And if that's the case, what recourse do these children have if they're not able to be helped in a particular environment? Do you direct them to other programs? How do you deal with that?
We try. The public school system may be better equipped for depending on the need than a private school system because of the resources that are available and at no charge, at least to the parents. But it's a hard moment. It's a very, very hard moment to sit with parents in our school who say to us, but I want my child to be in a Jewish school. I want my child to be able to participate in all the Jewish holidays. It's very difficult. And you have to sort of take a step back and look at the whole child and realize that we're talking not about just now, but life skills. And then hope that at some point, as the child gains the skills that he or she are missing now, at some point in the future they can come back not necessarily to our school, because they may have passed beyond that point, but engage in their meaningful Jewish education at a different level when they're ready and they're more skilled at doing it. But there aren't a lot of other Jewish day schools that necessarily could take or provide. If there are, we will send them there and say, we can't, but they can, so go there. This isn't about a competition, it's about a child. This is not about our school is better than your school, it's about this Jewish neshama needs something that we can't provide. But they can, so go there, please.
When I daven for my children, my own children, I daven first that they should be healthy and they should be safe. And then I daven that they should be a part of the community, that they should yearn for a relationship with God and have an opportunity to do that. And then I daven that they should maximize their potential. But when I look at that order of what I look for, it actually dovetails with what the World Health Organization says about quality of life. Being, belonging, and becoming. So if I have to take a child and say, I'm not going to necessarily achieve all of those goals in this setting, but I'm going to have a whole view of their being, of their belonging and becoming, then I may need to put them or direct them into an environment that can achieve them feeling good about themselves and maximizing their skills that aren't in the nuclear environment that I might otherwise want.
It could be very disappointing for the parents who aspire to more for their children, but the reality is different. You know, you have to look at the big picture for the child. Realistic expectations. It's very hard to have realistic expectations because we want to have the highest expectations, but we have to understand that, you know, just I talk about Vygotsky. Vygotsky was a Russian psychologist, and he has something called the area of proximity. So what it is where you want the child, where the child is, and where you want the child to be. And if your goal is too high, the child will never make it. And if the goal is too low, then there's no growth. So what I look at is you're always moving. You're always determining they've met that goal. Masha is a big expert in this. And you're moving them along and along and along, like when a baby is walking. And you don't walk right up in front of them, and you don't sit across the room. You're walking, and there's a safe place, and you keep that. But too often, I've seen in special ed that there are parents who have no expectations. I had one little boy in the public school, or maybe it was Rainier, I remember. And as a punishment, he couldn't watch television at home. Why couldn't he watch television at home? Because I wanted his mother to interact with him. And she just was right in front of the television set. So, and then if you have too high expectations, you frustrate the child. See, all parents have to have those realistic expectations. I just wanted to defend the teacher in the classroom. Because, Baruch Hashem, I have both experiences now and in my past. And nowadays, you have no idea, when you're talking with the typical children, the range of issues that teachers are dealing with. You have children in grade 8 who are functioning on a 3rd grade level and who are functioning on a 12th grade level, emotionally, academically, and functionally. And then you bring in this sweet little wonderful child who is functioning below that. Or you have a gifted child who's functioning above that. And the teachers are overwhelmed because just keeping that class in some semblance of discipline and some function, and parents who have tremendous expectations of where the children are going to go. And
especially in the private system.
But I would think it's the same way in the private system for sure. But even in the public school system, I taught in both. And we have to understand that teaching is a very difficult job. And we should definitely do differentiation. It's essential. But you have 25 children in a class, or 20 children in a class, and you're differentiating. It's impossible. It's impossible to have a life and to differentiate for every child. You can have one or the other. And I say to my teachers, have a life. Because if you don't have a life, you can't do anything.
Rabbi Doctor.
What? I'm sorry?
Sound of sanity, because you're
Subsanity.
Yes.
trying to.
Yes.
Rabbi Dr. Abraham Fried from Missouri, once I heard him once say where all children are special, and therefore all children deserve special education. I love that.
I think it's also important to remember that teachers are professionals, but they're people. And I think they have the same emotional responses. They get fearful and frightened and insecure, and they don't always know what to do. As Elaine is saying, in a class of 25, 26, 22 kids with so many needs, and I think most of the teachers I've met, most of the teachers I've seen in our school, or even my own personal career as a student, really want to teach. They want to be helpful. They want to promote growth. And sometimes the challenge of the situation could be beyond their own immediate skill set. So I agree with you that professional development is really an important part of that. I really do think that's true. Meaningful professional development, which is not simple. It sounds easy to do, but it's not simple. I don't think that having a big conference is meaningful professional development, because it's a one-off. You come to a lecture, and then it's nothing. Meaningful professional development is ongoing in a way that the teacher says, I'm supported, I get it, I can talk to somebody, I can try it out, and come back. That's difficult from a system point of view, because that too takes resources, like who's going to be the person, the trainer, the mentor. So I think teachers would want to, but sometimes feel they don't know how to. And trying to move them from not knowing how to knowing how is difficult.
And having somebody in the school that consistently can consult with them on regular basis would actually help them with specific situations. So I work in Zareno, and just being there for a year, the learning curve is tremendous because the staff is so knowledgeable. But you can always, have a specific question and ask, let's say, the social worker how to deal with situations, and then you learn about that particular event. I think if teachers had that support in a school, they would learn just through that, through consultation on regular basis.
And you try to set that up as much as possible. And that's what I think we try to do. But as I said, people learn in different ways, and we recognize that teachers too have their private lives, and they may have their 3 kids, and their mother-in-law's in the hospital, and they have to come up with a differentiated lesson on math or Chumash, and it's not easy. And I think some way the frustration you feel is the frustration that many teachers feel, because you know that there's a little boy or girl sitting in the corner of your classroom, and you know at the end of the day that the look on their faces, they didn't get it. And you go home and you're not sleeping well, because you know they didn't get it. And you might be worried, not only did they not get it today, but they may not get it tomorrow either. And it's an emotional burden that you carry. And I know that there are teachers who will come to me and say, we're not doing it for this kid. This child is not learning. What should we do? I don't always have the answers for that. And it's a difficult moment. We're not going to say leave the school, but I know that at the end of the year, has this child maximized have they become who they could become? I don't know.
So one of the suggestions I would like to make in terms of the support services that would go in is that, and it fits in with what you're talking about in terms of education, it's teaching the teachers, empowering the teachers. And when you put in the support such as the speech or the physio or the OT, I really see it valuable as having it as an embedded support. Because if you can have the OT model the strategies, model the supports to the teacher so the teacher can observe it and then be able to carry that on all the other times, then you're going to get a bigger bang for your buck. And so that's what needs. In order for there to be development, there has to be 4 components. There has to be the physicality, so they have to have the physical potential of doing something. There has to be neurodevelopment, so you can't expect the 6-year-old to achieve what a 3-year-old, you can't expect a 3-year-old to achieve what a 6-year-old can do neurodevelopmentally. But then there has to be motivation and opportunity, and that's where you have the motivation is seeing the kid where they're at, the asher husham, meet him where he's at, to be able to make that zone of proximity. But there has to be opportunity. So to have your input of your support services be for 45 minutes once a week is not going to make the change. What it has to be is a constant repetition. So educating the educators, empowering the teachers who are there as your front line by having the services embedded, I think is the best strategy.
There's another thing that I was just thinking about. Sometimes a parent will come and is looking at the academics. Like the child isn't getting it academically. And so my long-range study that I did over the course of 21 years, it's a very limited study. But one of the things that I've seen is that our priorities change over time. So in the beginning, you give them as much academics as you can. Right? You give them as much, right? And then there comes a point where you have to sit down with the teacher and the administration and the parents, and you have to say, okay, they're in grade 5. We've given them a lot, and academically, I don't know how, we're competing, I don't know much. What are your long-term goals? And I always talk about a 5-year goal. So when I was working at Zorenu, I thought to myself, where do I want them to be in 5 years? I did this with Bracha. So I would start, like I wanted her to be in a vocational program. And we chose being with babies. She started that 5 years before she was ready to do that. So that she had 5 years of growing. So when you decide, this boy or this girl isn't going to make it through in the Chumash, but we want him to be there. And after a while you can get the children involved as well. And we want them to be there, but what are our goals for them? And you never shortchange them, because you never know. I was a kid with severe learning disabilities. I was a kid that didn't make it into university. I had a cousin who did. She was brilliant. I wasn't. I went to a community college. I'm not saying this as just to say this, but she dropped out of Brooklyn College after a year and a half. I went on to get 2 masters. So if I had just been shut down, but I was encouraged, and so it was hard in school, so it was hard in school, so I kept going, kept being hard in school. So we never give up on a kid, but when you have unrealistic expectations, you destroy them. Mm-hmm. And when you destroy them, you can't. When a kid says to me, but I didn't get an A, you didn't get an A. So I give them a rubric and I say, okay, you're at a C, where do you want to go? And let's look at how I can get you there. And then that's a challenge that they're overcoming, and they feel good. Okay, I'm fine with that. We've all had challenges.
Right.
We all have challenges, and that's the way Hashem works in the world. And if we work through our challenges, we feel good about ourselves. Mm-hmm. So,
yes, I just wanted to jump on the same Vygotsky, who I'm a big fan of. And he, together with this theory of step-by-step development, he had a very important piece in his theory about that education is a social event.
Because the zone of Barcelona is based on peers.
Yes, right. It doesn't happen when you're sitting one-on-one with a teacher. You have to be part of some community. That's why we're at schools, basically. After all these years, after so many things achieved by humankind, by civilization, we're still in the school that is sometimes told to be a 19th century school, right? It's still the same old thing. Classes, bells, teachers, rows, like all that stuff is there, right? So because it's a social event. And when this kid is there and you feel you're not making it for him because he's not on the same level as like everybody else, it's still a chance for him. Because if you segregate this child and you think, I'm going to teach him one-on-one, 5 hours a day, and let's see, he's going to become next Bill Gates. probably not. He may become next Bill Gates, but he will be throwing chairs at his office, right? And nobody will employ him anyway.
Right.
He'll be genius, but with no use to anyone. And that's why, like, it's always a balance, as you always say, it's a balance, right? And you're absolutely right about the goals and everything. But to combine these social parts,
That's what I was talking
to
about.
keep those kids there,
Be a part of the
Thank
in
you for
my
adding
own
that.
eyes, I've seen unbelievable ways the kids with autism will go if they feel that they're part of the community. A number of them don't feel that they're different. They want to belong to, like even severely disabled by autism people who can speak. They want to be part of the mainstream body of students and go to drama and go to whatever class and feel accepted there and do as much as they can. And they actually function, I think this way, but anyway, they do other things better if they have this feeling, as any human being, right? Because if you feel good about yourself, you will achieve better in anything, in math, in language, because you will be motivated by the social community and by the social vibe you're getting. So
I just want to say from a social part, it's also not only the special needs child who benefits, but the other kid. As a parent, I chose Beis Yaakov because of Bracha. I saw how the school treated her. I saw how the rest of the kids learned from her and learned how to deal with her. Things that she couldn't do, they were able to process to say, hey, do we need a helper or can we need to encourage her to do it herself? And they were able to differentiate with the support of the teacher, but they were then able to differentiate, and they learned, and that fits in with your leadership piece. These kids who are in that social environment, it's a mutually beneficial environment.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for their contributions and for their thoughts and for the stimulating opportunity.
And on behalf of DANI, we just wanted to thank all of you for inspiring us and helping us all continue what we're trying to do. And just a small token. It's a cookbook, maybe you're right.
For his 2-year-old daughter.
I bought one from the kids who were by Soviets.
Oh, they're actually very good recipes.
Yes, they are.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and come join us for lunch. Thank you.
Great. I think you're...
Masha, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you for having us.
You know, the truth is, we probably could do more.
I'm actually wondering about that.
I really actually want to do, like I think an outreach piece that I talked about, sensitization workshop. I think that's what I'm trying to do.
We do that for big girls.
Yes, I know.
And especially then, if they get that little piece of time that they get out.
It's down that it's really important because
It goes with them from school to school in the public system,
that
they
it's
can
really
go with
important
it.
to
Or if there's any way to do half-time, and that's half half-time Jewish, or whatever their accommodation system is.
Yeah, it's funny that
You know, that's the program right now. We're being served by $7,500 from us, and that's $8 million from the schools. And there's still a lot of schools that rated those gap that we have between the radio and
I think we need to put in that we're doing IEPs and we're following everything else. And why not?
And
It's been years.
It has been.
I'm doing really well.
Thank you, and thank you for being here and raising that point to me again about the hearing.
Very, very good. At least in the public board, I don't see any kids with Down syndrome in the public board. It just dawned on me in the last few months. I've been in the public board for 15 years. I rarely see a kid with Down syndrome.
We send lots of our Serena ones to the public school.
Well, okay, so the Jewish kids are Serena, but like, where is...
No, that's what I'm telling you. We send a lot of our Serena Down syndrome to the public school.
And really?
yeah, I work in the afternoon.
Okay, that I'm not running into. I'm really curious because I thought like all of a sudden, where are all these kids going to school?
They're in the ME classes.
Perfect. Thank you, Leila.
You don't see that? Yeah. Okay.
We go back on phone.
Is this off? Still on? Oh.
They just heard me say that.
Yeah,
Can I rewind it, Tova?
no,
Multiple exceptionality.